Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Whenever we think about the collapse of a great civilization, we naturally kind of picture this dramatic Hollywood-style apocalypse, right? Like a devastating war, a completely deadly plague, maybe a sudden economic catastrophe, or, I don't know, a massive invasion from some foreign enemy. But when historians actually look closely at empires separated by thousands of years, they find this wild paradox. The end of an empire rarely looks like an ending at all. In fact, long before the final collapse, there's usually this quiet period where life appears completely, surprisingly normal.
So I want you to really consider a profound question here. How do civilizations actually fall? We've got these deeply ingrained assumptions that destruction is always sudden, loud and obvious to literally everyone living through it. But what if the collapse of a society is actually something you can live right through without even realizing it's happening?
This contrast really hits the nail on the head when we look at the difference between myth and reality. We are incredibly used to what we call loud history. Hollywood absolutely loves loud history. Think barbarian armies crashing through the gates of Rome, or the Maya civilization just vanishing overnight. But the historical reality? That's quiet history. By the time those barbarian armies actually showed up, Rome had already been weakening for generations. The Maya didn't just disappear in a single giant catastrophe. Their cities were gradually abandoned over centuries. Even the British Empire wasn't destroyed in one decisive battle. Its global influence just slowly faded as economic realities shifted. For the people actually living in those times, life just got a little more difficult, a little more frustrating with each passing decade. It's a slow, subtle decay over generations where, on the surface at least, normalcy completely persists.
And well, that brings us to the core mystery of this explainer. If the fall isn't sudden, what does the buildup actually look like? Beneath the appearance of stability, while markets operate, cities remain super crowded, and governments still function, these invisible cracks begin spreading through every single layer of society. We're going to look at the 5 signs of the silent decline. These are the cracks that spread while everyone thinks things are perfectly fine.
All right, sign number 1. Let's start with the very first sign, the foundational crack in literally any civilization: the erosion of trust. Every successful civilization depends heavily on public trust in its core pillars, right? Courts, governments, banks, universities, the media. Trust is what reduces uncertainty in our daily lives. But when that trust slowly erodes, man, things get complicated. You need more lawyers, more security, more contracts. Every single transaction becomes significantly more expensive and just way more difficult. People become highly skeptical. Suddenly, rules begin to feel kind of optional, conspiracy theories flourish, and political polarization totally intensifies. The institutions still exist on paper, the buildings are literally still standing there, but fewer and fewer people actually believe in them. And history shows us time and time again that rebuilding this trust is far, far more difficult than losing it.
Moving right along to sign number 2, this one deals directly with our collective drive.
Comfort replaces purpose. Look, as a civilization grows wealthier, survival becomes easier, which, let's be honest, is an absolutely incredible human achievement. But society naturally shifts its focus from long-term survival to immediate comfort. Entertainment expands, luxury becomes totally ordinary, and convenience becomes the absolute baseline expectation. But here's the danger. Societies slowly lose the willingness to make sacrifices for future generations. Education gets treated primarily as just a pathway to income rather than a genuine pursuit of knowledge. Large infrastructure projects suddenly become wildly unpopular because they take too much effort. Great civilizations often stop thinking long before they actually stop growing. Which brings us to the third sign, marking a highly dangerous shift in how a society views time itself. And this brilliantly illustrates a phenomenon known as present bias. Think about it. Ancient civilizations planted forests they knew they would never see mature. They spent centuries building massive cathedrals, fully knowing they wouldn't live to see them finished. Today, decisions are frequently measured by quarterly profits, the very next election cycle, or social media trends that barely last a few days. We all do this individually, sure, but when an entire civilization adopts this present bias, long-term resilience completely vanishes. Problems begin to accumulate far faster than they can actually be solved. All right, sign number 4 reveals a self-reinforcing cycle that basically fractures national unity. Look, economic inequality exists in literally every society. That's a given. But fragility really sets in when extreme wealth starts dictating access to politics, legal outcomes, and education. You essentially end up with 2 distinct societies existing inside one single nation. One reality is total abundance, and the other is absolute stagnation. This kind of division breeds deep, deep resentment, profound distrust, and severe political instability.
Many historians point to this excessive concentration of wealth as a major factor that shatters the unity required to keep a civilization resilient when times get tough. Finally, we arrive at the fifth sign. And honestly, this is perhaps the most fascinating psychological warning sign of the whole shebang.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how normalcy bias repeats throughout history. Every single civilization believes it's the grand exception. The Romans, they genuinely thought Rome was eternal. The Victorians completely believed the British Empire would last forever. Even the Soviet Union appeared utterly permanent to its citizens until just a few years before it completely dissolved. We just naturally expect tomorrow to resemble yesterday. Ironically, the stronger and more powerful a civilization becomes, the harder it is for the people inside it to even imagine its decline.
So why do we constantly miss it? I mean, why do our incredibly brilliant human brains completely overlook these massive civilizational shifts happening right in front of our own eyes? Let's move to and see how this builds over a lifetime. You see, our human brains evolved to detect immediate physical threats. A predator jumping out of the bushes, a fire, a sudden storm. We did not evolve to detect gradual, systemic decline. We are phenomenally great at running from bears, but terrible at noticing our environment slowly degrading. Think about it. If something changes by just 1% in year 1, almost nobody notices. By year 10, it's still barely noticeable. By year 25, that subtle decline is just kind of accepted as the new normal. And by year 50, everything is entirely different. But because it happens so incredibly slowly, the alarm bells in our heads literally never actually rang. This psychological blind spot is perfectly captured by the term shifting baselines. It's not that people are foolish, not at all. We just naturally compare life only to our own personal memories, not to what conditions were actually like decades or centuries ago. So instead of confronting the decline, each generation just adapts to the slightly degraded world they inherit, treating it as if it were the normal starting point. It's exactly like ignoring a slow leak in your roof until the ceiling finally caves in. Slow change simply rarely feels urgent enough to act on. But hey, here is the genuinely empowering news. History is absolutely not a predetermined script. Human societies are incredibly capable of learning, adapting, and ultimately changing our historical course. We are not doomed to repeat the exact same cycle just because previous empires did. So the crucial point is this: we don't study history just to predict the future with absolute certainty. We study it to spot the quiet buildup of these small, seemingly insignificant changes. The whole goal is to recognize the patterns early enough so we can actually wake up and respond to them before it's too late.
I want to leave you with this final, honestly chilling thought directly from our source material. By the time collapse becomes obvious, the silent stage is already over. The most dangerous period isn't the dramatic moment when everything falls apart. It's the long stretch beforehand when everything appears perfectly normal. I want you to take a look around at your present today with a completely different set of eyes. What silent changes might we